Hello and welcome everyone to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you guys for tuning in. We've got a great show ahead today where we'll be covering everything from the IDP rankings. We're going to continue with those, going into the fantasy college football rankings, and for the first time ever in the history of this show, I'm going to be talking about fantasy baseball. We're going to do a little mid-season roundup. But as always, before we begin, I do ask that you like, follow, and subscribe to the show. We also do receive a lot of comments, so if you are willing, do please leave a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, the network, and my fellow podcasters, so it is greatly appreciated as always. So, without further ado, let's get on into the show. We begin today's show with a segment about a very important Game 5 in the NHL between the Panthers and the Rangers. A huge conference game after my guy Sam Reinhart, who I told you guys about last time we talked about this series, scoring an overtime winner to even the series at 2 games apiece. He's such a great asset, and just before we begin, I just think that being able to talk hockey as a constant is such a special thing, because once we get into football season, hockey will fall by the wayside. So it's just been so fun talking hockey while we still have it around. But going into tonight's game between these two teams that are so well evenly balanced, we've talked about a lot of big stars for both teams. They have this players, but for tonight's game I want to highlight some players who can play up to their potential but just haven't, either in this series or for the postseason as a whole. Starting off on the Panthers side of things, in such a well-rounded team where you can get production from any level of this team, there aren't that really many holes that I can find, but there are some players who I definitely think have that untapped potential and can swing the series in the Panthers' favor. Let's start off with a player who is very hit or miss in my opinion, but when he's on in spades, and that is Carter Verhaeghe, their first line player, a player who they entrust a lot of their offense with. But he still is a very hit or miss player throughout his career. He has had some very huge moments, but he hasn't really pieced it all together, and I'm looking for him to be a big player in tonight's game to help the Florida Panthers take an advantage in this series. Tonight, in DraftKings, he is valued at 8.6K, only 4.8 fantasy points projection, but like I said, he still has that potential to have a huge game. We saw in Game 3, even though it was an overtime loss, that he had a huge game for them, one of their best players in that game. 2 goals, 2 assists. So you can see that Carter Verhaeghe is one of those players for the Florida Panthers that when he can produce, the Florida Panthers are a better team for it. And because he's in that first line, obviously a lot of it will have to go through him eventually. But still, in my opinion, he's had a really disappointing postseason and series overall. Only 6 points this postseason. So I really am looking for him to step up for the Florida Panthers in order for them to take control of the series. Another player who's a little bit more low-key but is also one of those well-rounded guys who can get hot at any moment, I'm looking at a player in Sam Bennett who, if you are looking for someone in fantasy who defines the term well-rounded, it is Sam Bennett, playing on their third line. Obviously not a huge headline player in terms of the Florida Panthers, but he is still a huge asset, whether it be in terms of power play, in terms of penalty kill, in terms of hits, if you're in one of those kind of leagues. So ultimately, I think that Sam Bennett will play a huge role in both ends of the ice in tonight's game. He is valued at 6.8K and 8.3 fantasy points, a little higher than a guy in Verhaeghe who you would expect more out of, but still, Sam Bennett is a solid piece to the Florida Panthers that you cannot forget about if you're looking to fill out your fantasy hockey team. On the Rangers side of things, they also have a lot of different players who really need to step up in order for them to take control of this series. Honestly, the New York Rangers as a team are right there in my minds as one of the Stanley Cup contenders. They just need everyone in this team to contribute, and these two guys speak to that notion. I'm going to start off with a guy who, ever since he came in a couple years back, has been a very solid player for the New York Rangers. And in this postseason, he has played well, but in this particular series, I'm looking him to score more goals, and that is Artemi Panarin in their second line. Tonight, he is valued at 9.6K, a little bit pricey for him. 12 fantasy points, though, so a little bit higher than the Panthers players who I talked about. He does have 14 points this postseason for the New York Rangers and 5 assists in the series, but those are the only points he has in this series, and he needs to score goals. He was brought into this team, yes, to produce, but also to be a goal-scoring threat in their second line to add more balance and depth to this team. Obviously, when you look at the New York Rangers, it's him, Kreider, and Trocheck as your big three. And of those big three, Artemi Panarin, at least in this series, in my mind, is kind of falling by the wayside a little bit. Yes, he can provide assists. Yes, distribution of the puck is important for the Rangers as a whole. They want to be aggressive. They want to work on their passing and move the puck up the ice in a timely manner. But overall, Artemi Panarin needs to also add more goals because this series has been very tight. We've seen both teams kind of struggle to score goals. We've seen some goal-scoring explosions from both teams as well, highlighted by Game 3. But more often than not, these are two teams who are trying to tactically figure each other out, and that is why this series is even. So look for a player tonight in Artemi Panarin to be the heartbeat of the New York Rangers' offensive attack and output. On the defensive side of things for the New York Rangers, I'm looking at a guy who is probably one of the best, most well-rounded defensemen in the league, who simply has not produced up to his stature, and that is Adam Fox in that first line pairing with Ryan Lindgren. Obviously, the Rangers pride themselves on having a defensive mind like Fox, a huge part of who they are in terms of a defensive unit. He is one of the many leaders in this New York Rangers team that kind of marries both their offensive mindset with their defensive mindset. Tonight, in terms of DraftKings, he is valued at 7.6, kind of a steal for a player of his caliber, but only 5.3 fantasy points, and I think that's reflective of his stats as well. Only 3 points in the series, and while yes, he's not necessarily a guy who you expect points out of as a defenseman, but as someone who has been in the Selke Trophy conversation for the best offensive defenseman over the past couple of years, you do kind of expect Adam Fox to add that kind of point value as well. However, he is very solid overall as a utility option for a fantasy hockey team tonight. I think he still needs to step up for the New York Rangers to have a chance. Obviously, this series has proven to be a very defensive-minded series, even though we have seen some goal-scoring spurts, like I said. But Adam Fox is one of those players on the Rangers who needs to show that aggression, because the New York Rangers are a team that really isn't overwhelmingly good in any particular statistic, and that kind of speaks to how their team is built, They have the weapons offensively, right? They have their big trio in Trocheck, Kreider, Panarin, some younger guys as well like Lafreniere and Kakko wanting to contribute, but they really don't necessarily stand out in one particular area. They just perform to the best of their abilities on any given night, and that is why they are here. And they're going against a Florida Panthers team that just has a depth and structure to them unlike any other team in the NHL outside of the two Western Conference finalists, in my opinion. So you are looking at a series that needs second kind of level players to step up and produce on both ends of the ice, whether it be a third liner on the Florida Panthers in Sam Bennett, who I expect a lot out of as someone who can be like that important depth piece both in real life and in fantasy, or whether it be a guy on the back end of the ice in terms of Adam Fox for the Rangers, who I expect a lot out of, both offensively and defensively, marrying what Peter Laviolette wants to see on the ice in both ends of the ice. So ultimately, I think that this particular game tonight will come down to the hard tacks. I think that goals will be very hard to come by tonight. That has been seen in terms of the over-under, in terms of points, sitting kind of like where the Western Conference Finals are kind of sat at as well, in my opinion, where it's at 5.5 and it hasn't really moved up or down. The money lines have been very reflective. The betting trends have been very kind of static. They stayed in the stasis where they haven't really gone up or down for any team. But that goes to show how good of a Final Four we have in the NHL right now, where we have very well-balanced, well-built teams that can produce exciting hockey series, and allows me to talk to you guys about who I think will be the best fantasy hockey players on any given night. We have such fantastic input to give you guys because of the fact that these players, we have seen so many different players on both conferences stepping up in spectacular ways, and ultimately I think that tonight in this Panthers-Rangers series we will see another unsung hero, whether it be Verhaeghe or Panarin, whether it be on the defensive end of things. I think that this series just has so many great players, and you just don't want it to end just because of the volatility that these teams present. But that should just about do it for this segment of today's show. Coming up next, we will be continuing to our final rankings for this IDP system. We will start with the D-backs. We will end with the D-backs. Coming up next on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Network. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello and welcome back, everyone, to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into the second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you to leave a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It means a lot to the network, to both me and my fellow podcasters as well. So any tip or donation or even question, which I can answer at the beginning of the next episode, whatever helps the network, please do consider donating at the link gsmc.cloud. Now, moving on to the second segment of today's show, we have gone over all the IDP rankings except for one. I could call them the quarterbacks of the defense. Yes, I'm talking about the defensive backs. We have a solid group in this top 10 who I really like. Some of my favorite players are on this list, and it is reflected in how all of these different defenses have shown up on this list as well, both young and old. So I'm really excited to present them to you. I think I'm going to count down backwards today. I know that I've started at the top, but I want to build up anticipation, plus since of adding graphics into my shows, I kind of want to start off at the bottom as well, because also at the bottom is one of my favorite players on that team right there in the back right there. So let's start off without further ado. Coming in at number 10 on this list, like I said, Devin Witherspoon. What a player he is. What a steal at number 5 overall last year for the Seattle Seahawks. let's go over his stats. 56 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, only 1 interception, but the impressive stat that stands out to me is his 16 pass breakups. An incredible season for the Seattle Seahawks. And honestly, guys, don't sleep on the Seattle Seahawks defense. They are an up-and-coming, hungry defense that just got one of the best defensive minds in all of football, in Mike Macdonald, as their head coach. So I am really excited to see how Mike Macdonald revamps this defense, gets them back into that Legion of Boom mindset, starting off with that aggressive secondary. Obviously, Devin Witherspoon is going to be the face of that secondary, but they still have Reek Woolen. Although he had a down year last year, I think that he will come back more hungry than ever, more fiery than ever. He's a stellar athlete. And also on the back end, they have that experience as well, with Julian Love in there as well. And up front, they're getting more dangerous. Draymond Jones coming back to Seattle. Also, Jaron Reed, don't forget about him. They're starting to round into a defense that in the next couple of years, maybe not next year, when Macdonald's plans are implemented, I think that this defense is very exciting, and Devin Witherspoon definitely, in my opinion, deserves to be in the top 10 coming into a second year. A very long, rangy corner, may not get as many picks as you would like out of someone who you might entrust in your IDP league fantasy team, but ultimately, Devin Witherspoon is a young corner who shows a lot of promise, and a young defense that is going to show a lot of promise in the upcoming years. So at number 10, Devin Witherspoon. Don't sleep on the Seahawks. Go Hawks. At number 9 overall is one of these guys. Also, these two players right here, and Devin Witherspoon and the guy I'm going to mention next, are the only 2 cornerbacks on this list. So be wary when you are drafting your IDP team that not many cornerbacks are in the top 10. The list the rest of the way is going to be safeties after this guy, so be warned right there. But coming in at number 9, kind of an interesting guy because of the fact that this particular team's secondary is trying to get younger. They still have older guys in there, but they want to meld this experience with the young talent that they have brought in, and I think this guy is the bridge to that. Reed Blankenship. Last year he had 79 solo tackles, no forced fumbles, 3 picks, and 11 pass breakups. And like I said before, Reed Blankenship is kind of the bridge guy to this young Eagles secondary. This year they had 2 steals in the draft, in my opinion, in Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, 2 guys that are going to immediately come in and perhaps start, but they still have guys like Darius Slay in this team. So the question mark for the Eagles secondary going into the season is, A, who is going to start, and B, how do you build this team that wants to take the next step and get younger, while also trying to incorporate a guy like Darius Slay who could still add that IQ to the secondary into the squad. And I think that Reed Blankenship rankings in the top 10 reflects that, because he is seen as a kind of low-key kind of profile guy, not the obvious pick in that Eagles secondary if you're looking at an IDP team. But I still think he is an asset to this Eagles team. He is still one of the younger guys who could potentially be the leader of the new secondary in the future for the Eagles, obviously incorporating Mitchell and DeJean into the team later on in the process. But Reed Blankenship, I think he's well deserved to be in the top 10. Only 2 cornerbacks in both him and Spoon, so that's pretty impressive for him. Coming in at number 8, the first safety on the list, and a guy who is going to be in this team's defensive plans for many years to come, already showing his talent, Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton is one of those players on the Baltimore Ravens defense that now is going to have an even bigger role because of the fact that Geno Stone and his production is gone to their rival Cincinnati Bengals. And the only other corners of note are Marlon Humphrey and Arthur Millette. And so Kyle Hamilton will be entrusted a lot in terms of the secondary. Last year he had 63 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, 4 interceptions, and 13 pass breakups. So you can see the level of production that he brings to the back end of the Ravens secondary. Obviously, they don't have Mike McDonald anymore, so we'll have to see how he continues to progress under new defensive coordinator Zach Orr. But Kyle Hamilton in this top 10 ranking does not feel like an over-ranking in the slightest. He's going to be one of the most exciting players in an IDP league this year. Watch out for him because he is going to be one of the best young players in that Baltimore Ravens defense that is continuing to grow. And I think that the transition from McDonald to Orr will be seamless for him. But coming in at number 7, a guy who many people might not have heard of, mainly due to the fact that this secondary doesn't necessarily get talked about that much, but this year I do think that they will have to be, and that is Josh Metellus. Last year he had 78 solo tackles, 4 forced fumbles, 1 interception, and 5 pass breakups. Josh Metellus is one of those guys in the Vikings secondary who often gets overlooked, mainly due to the fact that the problems that lay in the Vikings defense aren't in the back end. I think it all starts with the defensive front. They lose a lot of production up there. They add Jonathan Greenard, who's an interesting piece, but in terms of defensive fronts, Minnesota is no longer one of the stronger ones. And so the secondary now will step into the limelight for the Minnesota Vikings, in my opinion, this year, because of the fact that so much production up front is gone. And so you have to acquaint yourself with the name Josh Metellus and a guy later on in this list, because they are now the faces of the Minnesota Vikings secondary. These are guys that have been in the league for about 3 to 4 years, but really haven't had a chance to make names for themselves due to the fact that the Minnesota secondary was always about Harrison Smith, and then you had to focus on the problems they had up front. So Josh Metellus is a name to remember. I think that him being ranked in the top 10 goes to show how much ESPN is looking at Minnesota's secondary to step up. So look out for him as a potential steal in an IDP league. Moving on to number 6, another safety and guy in the NFC North who is also a part of another interesting new look defense. That is Jaquan Brisker of the Chicago Bears. Last year he had 66 solo tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 1 pick, and 9 pass breakups. And when I look at the Chicago Bears defense, it's very similar to the Seattle Seahawks defense. Young up-and-comers on the secondary, and guys like Jalen Johnson, who was a Pro Bowler last year, Kyler Gordon, going to get incorporated in this team, and Tyreek Stevenson. I think the Bears defense is going to be very good, much like the Seahawks in the next couple of years. I think that Jaquan Brisker is not the most popular of this Bears secondary, but the stats speak for themselves. I think he's a very solid piece. Another potential steal in an IDP league, in my opinion. I'm looking forward to seeing how the Bears DBs progress together, because this is a young unit, much like my favorite team, the Seattle Seahawks, like I said, that is very focused on attack mode. I think that it's going to reflect in the next couple of years. So look out for Jaquan Brisker. Getting into the top 5, these top 5 guys are very diverse, and I really like the top half of this list. So I'm really excited. But coming in at number 5 is a guy who, when he's fully healthy, is one of the most dynamic defensive backs in the league. He has a new head coach, so we're going to have to see how he progresses there. But I'm talking about Derwin James. Derwin James, one of the preeminent safeties in this league, that can really change the way people view the Chargers defense. Last year he had 86 solo tackles, no forced fumbles, 1 interception, and 7 pass breakups. But the huge question about the Chargers defense is how are they going to transition from Brandon Staley, who had this overwhelming stigma surrounding him and how he viewed the Chargers defense, to now when they have Jim Harbaugh, who wants to change the whole philosophy and culture of the Los Angeles Chargers. And he definitely has the defensive pieces to do that. You have guys at every level of the defense on the Chargers, in Joey Bosa up front, Khalil Mack in the middle, and a guy like Derwin James in the backfield. that are really solid pieces to build around if you're Jim Harbaugh. I think that when Derwin James and Asante Samuel are together in that backfield, they're both fully healthy. The Chargers have one of the scariest backfield duos in the entire NFL. And I'm looking forward to how Jim Harbaugh implements his defensive game plans with this team that has been much maligned over the past years for having so much talent and not producing. And Derwin James, look for him to benefit. I think he could potentially be in the top 3, if not number 1 overall in terms of IDP. So I'm really excited to see how he progresses. Coming in at number 3, a guy who's now down another backfield partner, but moves on to the Atlanta Falcons. Jesse Bates III, 89 solo tackles last year, 3 forced fumbles, 6 INTs, and 11 pass breakups. Jesse Bates is one of those guys who, I think, moving from the Cincinnati Bengals, where he was paired with Eli Apple as one of the best backfields in the AFC North for the past couple of years, moving on to Atlanta, a defense that really hasn't had that much depth, that much production over the past couple of years, wanting to get back to the force. They bring in Raheem Morris, a defensive-minded coach, so I'm really excited to see how Jesse Bates progresses under Raheem Morris's tutelage. I think that Jesse Bates has been one of the best DBs in the league over the past couple of years, and he well deserves to be in the top 3. Coming in at number 2, a surprise in my opinion. We talked about the Vikings secondary. This is the second piece to that. Cameron Bynum, 94 solo tackles last year, 3 forced fumbles, 2 INTs, 9 pass breakups. Cam Bynum and Josh Patelis, I can't say this enough, will now have to produce for the Minnesota Vikings. It's reflected in ESPN's rankings. There's no production up front for the Minnesota Vikings anymore. Only Jonathan Greenard I can think of. But ultimately, Cam Bynum is a solid player. He just hasn't had that high-profile image to kind of make his name known. So you need to get acquainted with the Minnesota Vikings secondary, in my opinion, because they could be huge steals in terms of IDP. But coming in at number 1, one of the best young safeties in the league, in a defense that has a lot of interesting pieces, a very underrated defense in my opinion. That is Antoine Winfield Jr. 26 solo tackles last year, 6 forced fumbles, 3 INTs, 12 PDs. One of the most rangy DBs in the league. Very talented, very skilled, following in his father's footsteps. I love Antoine Winfield Jr. in this Bucs defense that has a lot of different pieces that they're trying to figure out how to fit into this defensive squad. They're an underrated defense. They're an underrated team, in my opinion, and Antoine Winfield is quickly becoming one of the young faces of that squad. But that should just about do it. I had such a pleasure talking to you about IDP leagues and ranking these different position groups. But coming up next, we transition from IDP to fantasy college football, where I will be talking about my top 10 in terms of running backs and wide receivers. Should be very exciting. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Coming up right now, we have some very exciting segments ahead. Like I said, we are moving from IDP to fantasy college football. We talked about the running backs last episode. The quarterbacks rather last episode. Sorry about that. But we are moving on to their backfield partners, the running backs, and later on in the show, we'll be looking at the wide receivers. So I'm just going to pull up my graphic here. But looking at college running backs, we have some really exciting young players on this list. A lot of different conferences represented. One conference in particular that I'm really excited to talk about. So let's get right into it. Starting off at number 10, though, we have a group of 5 representative. We talked about his quarterback in the backfield last episode. Now we talk about him, Ishmael Mahdi. He had 223 carries last year for 1,331 yards and 10 TDs. If you're looking for a low-profile kind of guy from a group of 5 school that has potential to be one of the more exciting schools in the group of 5. Look for a guy in Ismail Mahdi who can have that production. Texas State brought in Jordan McLeod to kind of bolster this squad and really make them really talented. And while they're not the most high-profile group of 5 school, I think they're going to have a lot of exciting pieces on their offense. We talked about them a little bit last episode when we talked about Jordan McLeod and what he brings from JMU. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this backfield operates. So look out for Ismail Mahdi at the number 10 position for your fantasy college football team, rather. Coming in at number 10, he's starting off a run of Big 12 running backs. We're going to see a lot of them on this list. DJ Giddens of Kansas State, 223 carries last year, 1,226 yards, and 10 TDs. Coming out of Kansas State is one of those teams in the Big 12 that are right there. They are expecting to compete in the Big 12. It's going to be interesting to see how they transition from a guy in Will Howard who was such a reliable, steady hand at the QB position to a guy in Avery Johnson who offers more of a dual threat kind of ability. So it's going to be interesting to see how DJ Giddens gets his production. Obviously, Chris Kleiman is such a great offensive mind over there at Kansas State. So it's going to be interesting to see how he implements both Giddens and Johnson into the system because of Johnson's abilities as a dual threat QB. But I'm really excited to see how DJ Giddens progresses. Could be a very nice pick in a fantasy college football league. Coming in at the number 8 position, another Big 12 running back. Sorry, I'm getting all mixed up with my fantasy college football positions. We are going to off with Devin Neal. 203 carries last year, 1,280 yards, 16 touchdowns. Now, Kansas is such a weird team because when they have healthy quarterbacks, they're honestly one of the best offensive teams in the country. When Jalen Daniels is healthy, they are one of the best offensive teams in the country, especially when you add in Devin Neal's production. But that has not been the case over the past couple of years. We have seen Jalen Daniels go off and on the field constantly, no constant stability at the QB position, but Devin Neal has always been a constant for the Kansas backfield. Whoever the quarterback is, look for them to have a nice little partnership. I love Devin Neal as a running back. He has been such a pest in the Big 12, and if Kansas wants to compete in a new look Big 12, it all starts with the backfield, whoever is the quarterback, and Devin Neal. So I'm really excited to see what he can do this year in terms of fantasy. Coming in at number 7, let's keep the Big 12 train rolling with a guy who may not be familiar to so many people because of the fact that he kind of came onto the scene last year. Taj Brooks, 290 carries last year, 1,541 yards, 10 TDs. He was only the second quarter running back in the Big 12 in terms of production behind the guy at number 1. Hint, hint there. But ultimately, Taj Brooks is a nice little surprise. Last year, some people may have benefited from taking him if they knew about him. This year, he's not as much as a surprise, so try and get him as early as possible. I really like what he did for Texas Tech, a team that is in the lower half of the Big 12. So they can still put up points, though, and it all starts with Taj Brooks. Obviously, they don't have the best of quarterbacks in terms of production, but Taj Brooks is such an exciting player. Should be a steal. Still a steal, in my opinion, for anyone looking to bolster their fantasy college football squad. So I'm really, really excited about him. Coming in at number 6, another guy who a lot of people might not be familiar with, Darius Taylor. Darius Taylor of Minnesota. Minnesota have had a couple good running backs in the past couple of years, like Muhammad Ibrahim, but Minnesota is a team in transition in the Big 10. They lose a guy in Athan Kaliakmanis at the QB position to Rutgers. They bring in Max Brosmer from New Hampshire, who has 36 career starts. But ultimately, I think that Darius Taylor will get a lot of production now because Minnesota is going to be one of those teams in the lower half of the Big 10. So look for him to get a lot of rushing yards there. Coming in at number 5, probably my favorite guy on this list, Phil Maffa, and I'll tell you why. For the best part of 2 decades, the thing in people's minds that Clemson could always hang their hat on was stability at the QB position. You had 2 guys in Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, who on any given Sunday you could rely on, and now that's gone. We saw transitioning into the 2020s with DJ Uiagalelei, the failure there, and we're seeing it a little bit with Cade Klubnik as he's trying to adjust to the pressure of being the Clemson QB. And so, as we saw last year, the running backs for Clemson really step up the spotlight. Will Shipley obviously was such a great running back for them as well, and now it's Phil Maffa's turn. I love Phil Maffa. Such a Dabo Sweeney player as well. So much heart and grit. Last year, 179 yards, 905 yards and 179 carries, 13 touchdowns for him. Look for him to have a big year, and in my honest opinion, for the next couple of years, always be sure to look out for Clemson running backs in terms of fantasy college football, because trust me, the narrative is shifting from a QB school to a running back school, and that is why I love Phil Maffa. Coming in at number 4, another Big 12 guy in RJ Harvey of UCF. 226 carries last year, 1,416 yards. Sorry, I'm getting all muddled up. 16 touchdowns. This is a guy on a team where UCF is going to be one of those teams that puts up a lot of points, not a lot of wins. So look for him to have a huge amount of production. Obviously, UCF is not the prettiest team in the Big 12. They're going to be sitting at the lower half of the table, but the Big 12 is such an even conference where on any given Saturday, a team can put up a huge amount of points and surprise people, and RJ Harvey is reflective of that. We have a lot of Big 12 running backs on this list, such a diverse conference where running backs can be the stars of the show. So I'm looking forward to seeing how RJ Harvey at UCF plays this season. Coming in at number 3, a guy who I expect to kind of regress to the mean, but still could be one of the preeminent running backs in college football this year, Omarion Hampton. Obviously, he loses his QB in Drake May, and they bring in Max Johnson from Texas A&M to take over that QB role. Obviously, Omarion Hampton, another one of those guys who just came onto the scene out of nowhere, really benefited from having an experienced QB in Drake May last year, so that is why I think his production will go down. But still, he could be an interesting player, mainly due to the fact that UNC is transitioning QBs, and so he might get more rushing production, but we'll have to see. He had 1,504 yards last year and 15 touchdowns. So overall, Omarion Hampton, look for him in a team where the QB situation isn't as set as it would like to be, to have a huge amount of production. Coming in at number 2 on this list is a player who I'm really excited about in a group of 5 team who can make a lot of noise this year, Ashton Jeanty. The story with Boise State is an interesting one. They get former 5-star recruit Malachi Nelson from USC after he saw that Miller Moss was more likely than him to be the starting QB for USC. He transfers to Boise State, and now they become one of the more high-profile names in the group of 5. Ashton Jeanty already being one of those huge production running backs last year, 1,347 yards, 14 touchdowns last year for him. I'm really excited for him and this Boise State team to make some noise if Malachi Nelson is who they think they are. Ashton Jeanty is already a staple of that backfield, so I'm really excited to see how Boise State looks this year. But coming in at number 1 overall, is it really any surprise? Our last Big 12 representative, probably the best one, Ollie Gordon II. 1,732 yards last year, 21 touchdowns, Doak Walker recipient, Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, all the accolades for Ollie Gordon. For an Oklahoma State team last year who surprised a lot of people by making it to the Big 12 championship, they're going to surprise no one this year. I do see them kind of still being one of the preeminent Big 12 squads, if Alan Bowman, a journeyman QB, can keep on producing big yardage numbers. But it all starts and ends with Ollie Gordon, in my opinion, for OSU going into the season. And in a much more even Big 12, Ollie Gordon, I expect to put up even better stats, maybe sniffing 2,000 yards. That might be wishful thinking, but I think he has it in him to be a dominant force. He's likely going to be gone quickly off of fantasy college football boards come draft time. So be sure to get him as quickly as possible. But that will just about do it for this edition of my top 10. Coming up next, be sure to tune in for the wide receivers in the next segment. Should be very exciting. We will be right back to talk about them.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the running backs in terms of fantasy college football. This segment, we transition to the wide receivers. Very excited about this one as well. We have a lot of high-profile picks for this fantasy college football season, so I'm really excited to look at them. So without further ado, let's get right into it. At number 10, a really interesting guy out of Hawaii, true freshman last year in Pefeli Ashlock with 832 yards and 9 touchdowns as a freshman. I really think this is a very interesting pick in the top 10 because of the fact that he plays for Hawaii, but I really think it's benefited from the QB he has, Braden Shager, 5th all-time Hawaii passing leader, a school that has such good QBs, like Timmy Chang and Colt Brennan, so not bad for him. A very experienced player throwing to this young Pefeli Ashlock. So I'm really excited to see how this young receiver develops, and he could be a steal for fantasy leagues everywhere. So I'm really excited about him. Coming in at number 9, kind of a guy we've already talked about on the show because we talked about USF a lot, but Sean Atkins. He had 1,054 yards last year, 7 TDs. Really excited to see him continue that partnership with Byron Brown, a dynamic QB for USF. And USF, honestly, is not going to be one of the best group of 5 teams. They're not going to be looking to the 12-team college football playoff. And so I think that Sean Atkins could be a steal. He's not a high-profile name like some of the other guys on this list. So if you're looking for someone who people might overlook due to the fact that he's at a group of 5 school, look for Sean Atkins. Coming in at number 8, we have Joey Hobart. 895 yards, 8 TDs, another group of 5 player. I think that Joey Hobart, in terms of as wide receivers go, he's not as prominent as some other guys on this list, much like Sean Atkins, but look for him to continue to produce. He is such a high-level player. I think that he will be a high prospect on this list. So I'm really excited to see what he does. But coming in at number 7, a guy who is entering a very wide open wide receiver core for an Oregon team that looks very exciting. Tez Johnson, the first of 2 Oregon wide receivers on this list. You can probably guess who the second one is going to be. But Tez Johnson is going to have one of the best QBs in recent years in college football, and Dylan Gabriel throwing to him, transferring in from Oklahoma. So Tez Johnson, last year, his stats were 1,182 yards, 10 TDs. Look for them to inflate. Look for him to be off boards early, along with a guy who's coming up later in this list. I think that Oregon's going to have one of the best wide receiver groups in the country, starting off with Tez Johnson, moving into that number 1 role, taking over from Troy Franklin, who is off to the NFL. So I'm really looking forward to how Tez Johnson looks this year. Coming in at number 6, we have another kind of low-profile guy in Jalen Royals of Utah State. Jalen Royals had a great year last year, 1,080 yards, 15 touchdowns for him. But I also think this is one of those guys who benefits from new QB. Bryson Barnes comes into Utah State, transferring from Utah, obviously thrust into the spotlight for Utah last year after Cameron Rising's injury. Started most of their games, had some huge wins. So I really think that it helped his confidence last year. He's still a very erratic guy. He had 13 picks last year, only 17 touchdowns. But coming into Utah State, I really think it helps to have a guy of Royals caliber to help him transform into a quarterback who started out at a high-profile level and is now moving to a lower-level school without much pressure. So I'm really looking forward to that wide receiver QB duo. But coming in at number 5 is a guy who a lot of people might not know at a school that's more known for basketball than football, if you ask me. Rookie White of the UNLV Runnin' Rebels. Now, like I said, if you think of UNLV, you think of 90s basketball, Jerry Tarkanian. You don't think of football. But I think that's all going to change. Before we go into why I think that, let's go look into his stats. 1,483 yards and 8 touchdowns. And I think that the reason why Ricky White is ranked so highly is because there's now excitement in the QB room of UNLV. They get a very high-profile prospect from Lake Travis, a kind of pipeline school from high school to college for a lot of college QBs. And this guy is very exciting. Bo Edmondson comes into UNLV, the number 25 pocket passer and number 27 pocket passer for ESPN 300. Out of the class of 2023, he had 4,767 yards in his high school career, brings that production to UNLV, and I think having a receiver in Ricky White will just make his transition that much more easy. I'm really excited to see how a lower profile guy like Ricky White progresses. Look for him to be a steal in fantasy college football. Coming in at number 4, our second Oregon wide receiver on this list, transferring in from Texas A&M after not really being as high profile of a player as people thought he would be. Evan Stewart, kind of a player who failed in the Jimbo Fisher era at Texas A&M, wants a new look, goes and transfers to Oregon. Only 514 yards last year, 4 TDs. Look for that number to rise because he now has an established QB in Dylan Gabriel at Oregon with him. Like I said before, Oregon's looking to be one of the best wide receiver cores in the country. And Evan Stewart, look for him. Still only a redshirt sophomore, so he has a lot of years left in him to be the player that a lot of people thought he was going to be at A&M. So I'm really excited to see how he looks in an Oregon Ducks jersey this year. Coming in at number 3, another guy who's kind of a lower profile, Torrey Horton of the Colorado State Rams, 1,136 yards, 8 TDs last year, and I really think this is kind of reflective of how a young QB in Braden Fowler-Nicolosi is going to progress. Last year, Braden Fowler-Nicolosi kind of came onto the scene as a guy who was very erratic, had a lot of yards last year, but also a lot of turnovers. He wants to improve on that, and Torrey Horton can help him in that area there. Look for Colorado State. While they're going to lose a lot of games, I think that this QB wide receiver duo is a very intriguing storyline to look out for. Look for Torrey Horton to be a steal at number 3 in fantasy college football rankings. Coming in at number 2, a guy who you've definitely heard of, maybe not as much as you would like, but still a very high-profile player out of the SEC in Luther Burden. I really love Luther Burden. One of the most underrated 5-star recruits in my opinion, mainly due to the fact that he picked Missouri over other high-profile SEC schools. 1,212 yards last year, 9 touchdowns, and him and Brady Cook are looking to be one of the more underrated QB wide receiver duos in the SEC. I love Brady Cook as well. I love this Missouri team. They're definitely looking to break into the 12-team college football playoff, maybe not as the SEC champion because they have other teams like Georgia and Texas above them, but I really love this Missouri squad, and I really love Luther Burden. Like I said, Still very underrated in my opinion, because a lot of you may not have heard of him out of Missouri. So look for him to go early off of fantasy draft boards now that you know about him. But I'm not certain he's as good as this guy who's number 1 on the list, who I'm really, really excited about now that he moves to the Big 12, and that is Tetairoa Macmillan. What a monster of a player he is. 1,402 yards last year, 10 touchdowns. Moving into the Big 12, a conference where points will be scored in bunches. Look for him to be one of the most exciting wide receivers in that Big 12. Obviously, looking at his quarterback in Noah Fafita, freshman last year, who came into Arizona, totally revitalized the culture of the program. I'm really excited to see Arizona in the Big 12, along with all these teams that are going to look to take them down a peg. Can Kansas State do it? Can Oklahoma State do it? I don't think so. I'm looking at Arizona as my favorite for the Big 12, and the reason why is Noah Fafita could have a breakout season, a Heisman Trophy candidate in my opinion, all because of this guy, Macmillan, right here. I think he's one of the preeminent wide receivers in college football. Expect him to be the first wide receiver of fantasy draft boards come draft time. But that will just about do it for my fantasy college football wide receiver rankings. Coming up next on my show, for the first time ever, we are talking fantasy baseball. Mid-season roundup should be very exciting. I'm very excited to talk about a new sport that doesn't get featured a lot on the show. So tune in. We will be right back. Hello everybody, and welcome back to the final segment of today's GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and it should be a very exciting one. Guys, we are going to talk about, for the first time ever in the history of this show, fantasy baseball. We are approaching the midway point of the season, so I just wanted to look into a mid-season roundup. Obviously, I could have talked about the Wolves-Mavs tonight, but I didn't expect there to be a Game 5, so this is kind of a panic segment, but not really, because I'm really excited to talk about baseball for you guys. But let's just get right into it. It should be a very exciting segment for me. Obviously, if you are looking at hitters, it's still Shohei Ohtani. I mean, what can I say about this guy? Like, you can go to bed for the next 10 years and Shohei Ohtani will always be the best player in baseball when you wake up. He's just such a fantastic player. Well, with the controversy surrounding him, yes, with the whole interpreter thing, you can say that, yeah, he's not as high profile as he used to be, but he's still one of the best players in the league. Whether or not he pitches as well, obviously he's not pitching this year, but he's still hitting .336 average, 13 home runs, 7th in the league, 35 RBIs, and an OPS of 1024. I mean, what else can we say about this guy? He can move to any team in sports, be the most high-profile player there, obviously on a Dodgers team that has so many good players. Shohei Ohtani just being added to that team makes them even more potent, and controversy or not, Shohei Ohtani is shining through as baseball's figurehead right now, and it's just a pleasure to watch. However, if you're looking for a more lower profile yet still big name player for your fantasy baseball squad moving into the midway point of the season, how about Bobby Witt Jr., the young shortstop from a Kansas City Royals team who many expected to surprise this season, but not as surprising as being second place in the AL Central. Sorry about that. AL Central, behind another surprise team in the Cleveland Guardians. They're right now 34-22. The Royals are one of those teams where you don't expect a huge fantasy player to break out, but Bobby Witt Jr. has been just that, with 309 average, 9 home runs, 36 RBIs, 924 OPS. I think that Bobby Witt Jr. is going to be the face of the Royals franchise for the next decade and a half. I really like him as a young shortstop. It's promising. And as a player in terms of fantasy, I think that a lot of people kind of took him on blind faith because they saw how he could progress with the Royals, but I don't think many people expected his breakout season to be as big as it has been. Another guy who I really like on kind of a team that's not going to compete in the latter half of the season, so if you want a kind of guy to pick up midway through your season who is going to perform for a team that's not going to perform, Jazz Chisholm, a 285 batting average, 8 home runs, 27 RBI, 792. He's sitting right around that outfielder 12 position in terms of fantasy baseball, but an exciting young player as well for a Marlins team that's not competing right now. So expect him to produce in a team that's not producing, if you know what I mean. Moving on to the pitchers. Obviously, you can talk about a lot of pitchers, but I just want to talk about a huge feel-good story that was highly unprecedented in the history of baseball right now. Obviously, it was kind of tarnished last night, but I still want to present it to you guys because it's just incredible what this guy has done coming in from Japan. I'm talking about Shota Imanaga. Now, in the history of baseball, only 37 pitchers in the history of the MLB have ever had as good a start as this guy ever. You have to go back to 1945 to even find a guy who did this. Shota Imanaga's first 5 games, 5-0, .84 ERA in his first 5 games in the league. 58 Ks, obviously, for a middling Cubs team. But when you think about it, yes, this is a new era where guys are not pitching further into games, but Shota Imanaga has just been an absolute revelation. Obviously, he got shelled last night by the Milwaukee Brewers. This run could not continue forever, but just goes to show that a lower profile guy coming in from Japan, known as the throwing philosopher, teaching a thing or two to the league. He's not like the prettiest guy in baseball terms. He's not the fastest pitcher, but he's known for his command and his curveball, and it has been confounding the MLB ever since he arrived this season. So Shota Imanaga, a feel-good fantasy player. A lot of people may have lucked out on him trying to find a pitcher who could break out and have a nice season. So congratulations to you. But to those who may not have been attuned to him or his game, do look to pick him up midway through the season if he's still out there. But coming into the season as well, Mets fans might want to cover their ears for this part of the show. Zach Wheeler, he has been one of the highest profile pitchers on a team that has been one of the best in baseball in the Phillies. 6-3 record, 2.53 ERA, 76 Ks. So this guy has been no surprise. He probably has been on your fantasy squad, but if he isn't, look for him to be picked up off the waivers if you're lucky enough, because he should be rostered by a huge amount of people. Now, looking at a team and some players that have been injured, you might want to look in the latter half of the season, should they come back. Let's talk about the Texas Rangers, defending World Series champions, right now in a bit of a slump, although Corey Seager isn't. Look for him if you're in like a daily fantasy baseball league. 8 homers in 8 games, just an incredible, outstanding player. Hopefully he can continue to push the Rangers back to relevancy, back into first place in an AL West that has not been that good this year. But I want to talk about the pitchers that the Rangers have on the injured list that could come back and really help your fantasy baseball team. Max Scherzer and Jacob deGrom. Right now, both of them are on the IL. They might have been expected to have come back already, but on the IL, they still sit. Max Scherzer, obviously an experienced pitcher. Last time he pitched a full season was 2022, and that season 13-6, 3.77 ERA, 174 K, still doing it in what is his 15th season in the league. I expect him to come back, immediately make a huge impact for a Texas Rangers squad that is looking to make a late season push. Right now they are not producing, and he could really help them. And another guy in Jacob deGrom, who, when fully healthy, he's perhaps the best pitcher in all of baseball. So once he's healthy, look for him to go swiftly off of waivers. But I just want to talk to you guys about Jacob deGrom and how long it has been since he has pitched a game, and how long it has been since we have seen the brilliance he brings to the game of baseball. If you want to go back to the last time he pitched a game and his team won, that was April 28th, 2023 against the New York Yankees. And if you want to go to his last quality start, where he pitched deep into a game and won a game without a no decision, you have to go back about a week later than that, in April 23rd, 2023 against the A's, when he pitched 6 innings and had 11 Ks. So you can see that Jacob deGrom is probably perhaps the best pitcher in baseball when healthy. So in the latter half of the season, look out for those two guys on the Texas Rangers team that wants to compete to come back. But that's just about do it. I enjoyed this segment so much. Not a lot of fantasy baseball talk on this show, so I'm really glad that I could get at least one segment for you guys. But that should just about do it for it. As always, I do ask that you like and follow and subscribe to the show. Leave a tip and donation at the link gsmc.cloud. This has been this edition of GSMC's Fantasy Sports Podcast. My name is Chris Sheppard. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will see you tomorrow for another exciting edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.